Somewhere between 50,000 and 100,000 years ago, a human ate something and died within hours for no visible reason. No predator, no injury, no fall. Just ate a plant and stopped living. The people who watched it happen had no framework for understanding what they had just seen. They had no word for poison, no concept of toxic compounds, no understanding of chemistry of any kind. What they had was a dead person and a half-eaten plant, and a question that would take our species tens of thousands of years to even begin answering. How does something that looks like food kill you? That question is arguably one of the most important questions in human history, because the people who figured it out lived, and the people who did not figure it out did not. Let's start with the most uncomfortable truth about how ancient humans learned anything dangerous. They learned it by dying. Not one person. Not even a few people. Entire generations of humans accumulated knowledge about poison through repeated fatal encounters that eventually produced survivors who remembered which plants killed members of their group. The knowledge that a specific berry causes death did not come from laboratory analysis or chemical testing. It came from watching someone eat that berry and die, then watching it happen again, then again, until the connection between that specific plant and that specific outcome became part of the group's shared survival knowledge. This is not how we like to imagine ancient human intelligence. We prefer stories of clever ancient humans making brilliant observations. But the honest version is that poison knowledge was written in human deaths across thousands of years before it became wisdom. Here is something genuinely remarkable, though. The human species got surprisingly good at this. Archaeological evidence and analysis of ancient plant use suggest that hunter-gatherer groups had developed remarkably comprehensive knowledge of which local plants were dangerous and in what quantities before any written records existed anywhere. Not just which plants kill. Which plants kill quickly versus slowly. Which plants cause symptoms that look like other things. Which plants are safe in small amounts but lethal in larger amounts. Which parts of a plant are dangerous, while other parts of the same plant are safe. This level of nuance is not what you expect from people without chemistry, but it makes complete sense when you understand that this knowledge took tens of thousands of years of painful trial and error to build, and was preserved through oral transmission as seriously as any other survival-critical information. Let's bring up something that most people have never considered about ancient poison knowledge: animals. Ancient humans were not the only species navigating a world full of toxic plants. Every animal in their environment was doing the same thing. And animals that had been co-evolving with those specific plants for millions of years had developed behavioral and physiological responses to toxic plants that ancient humans had tens of thousands of years to observe. Watch a group of hungry animals approach a plant and avoid it. Watch sick animals seek out specific plants. Watch which plants every animal in the area refuses to eat, even when desperate with hunger. These observations were not accidental. Evidence from multiple indigenous cultures worldwide shows systematic ancient attention to animal feeding behavior as a primary source of information about which plants to avoid and which plants had medicinal properties. The animals were running a continuous experiment that ancient humans read like a book. Let's bring up something about the dose problem, specifically because this is one of the most sophisticated pieces of ancient pharmacological knowledge, and it is genuinely astonishing that ancient humans figured it out without chemistry. The same compound that kills you in large amounts can heal you in small amounts. We know this in the modern world as the foundation of pharmacology. A Swiss physician named Paracelsus stated the formal principle in the 16th century that the dose makes the poison. But ancient humans were applying this principle practically thousands of years before Paracelsus was born. Willow bark was used in ancient Egypt and ancient Greece to reduce fever and pain. The active compound is salicin, which is chemically related to aspirin, and which, in concentrated synthetic form, can cause serious gastrointestinal harm. The ancient practitioners who developed willow bark medicine understood through accumulated empirical observation that the right amount helped and the wrong amount hurt. They did not know why. They knew it was true. Let's bring up the ancient antidote story because this is where things get genuinely fascinating. Around 120 BCE, a man named Mithridates VI became king of Pontus in what is now northern Turkey. He had watched his father die from poisoning. He grew up in a court environment where assassination by poison was a routine political tool, and he decided he was not going to be next. What Mithridates did in response to this threat was arguably the first systematic scientific pharmacological research project in human history. He spent years deliberately and carefully consuming tiny amounts of every known poison while simultaneously testing every known antidote. The goal was to build immunity. The method was proto-scientific. He kept records. He varied the doses. He tested on prisoners. He worked with physicians. He was attempting to empirically discover the boundaries of human tolerance to toxic substances. The resulting preparation he developed and reportedly consumed daily was later called Mithridateum and was considered so comprehensive in its protective properties that it remained one of the most sought-after medicines in the ancient world for over 1,000 years after his death. Here is the specific detail about Mithridates that should genuinely disturb you. When his kingdom finally fell and he was captured by Roman forces, he attempted to commit suicide by poison but failed. He had made himself so thoroughly immune to so many toxic substances that his own suicide attempt did not work. He had to ask a soldier to kill him with a sword instead. That is either the most darkly comic medical outcome in recorded history or the most disturbing testament to the effectiveness of his research, depending on how you look at it. But either way, it confirms that his immunity was real. The ancient pharmacological research had genuinely worked. Let's bring up what was happening in parallel in ancient India, because this is not a story that belongs only to the Mediterranean world. Ancient Indian texts, including the Arthashastra, written approximately 300 BCE, contain extensive and detailed information about poisons. The classification of poisons by symptom and speed of action, methods of detection, including behavioral signs and potential victims, and crucially, detailed information about antidotes for different classes of toxic substances. This was not folk knowledge casually assembled. This was organized, systematically recorded pharmacological information written down in a political and military context because in the ancient political world, poison was a weapon, and understanding it was a matter of state security. The sophistication of the ancient Indian poison literature suggests that the underlying knowledge it recorded was considerably older than the texts themselves. Someone had been accumulating this information for a very long time before it was written down. Let's bring up something about ancient Egypt that most people find surprising. Among the most significant ancient documents we have regarding poison knowledge is the Ebers Papyrus, dated to approximately 1550 BCE. This document contains over 800 medical recipes and prescriptions. Many of them involve substances we now know to be genuinely pharmacologically active, including substances that, in wrong doses, are genuinely toxic. What is remarkable about the Ebers Papyrus is not just that ancient Egyptians knew these substances existed, it is that they knew which conditions each substance was appropriate for, which dose was therapeutic, which combinations worked and which did not. This is the recorded version of accumulated experimental knowledge that predates the document itself by an unknown but certainly enormous period of time. The Egyptian physicians writing these recipes were not inventing them from scratch. They were recording a tradition. Let's bring up the social infrastructure that made ancient poison and antidote knowledge possible to accumulate and preserve. Because this knowledge did not live in books for most of human history, it lived in specific people within communities. The shaman, the healer, the village elder who knew plants. In many cultures, these roles were specifically trained across generations through explicit apprenticeship systems. A young person selected for this role would spend years learning from the existing specialist. The knowledge transferred was extraordinarily specific, not just which plants were dangerous, but the entire contextual knowledge surrounding them, how symptoms presented, what helped and what made things worse, the observable signs that distinguish different types of poisoning from each other and from other illnesses. This transmission system meant that a single community could carry accumulated experimental knowledge that in practice represented thousands of years of painful trial and error compressed into one person's working memory. Now, here is the thing that genuinely connects all of this ancient knowledge to something most people encounter without realizing it. Your modern pharmacy is built on a foundation that is directly continuous with the ancient world's poison and antidote knowledge. Approximately 25% of all modern pharmaceutical drugs are derived from or directly inspired by compounds that traditional cultures identified through exactly the process we have been describing. Tens of thousands of years of observational trial and error, systematic watching of who got better and who did not, patient cross-generational transmission of what was learned, morphine from the opium poppy, digitalis for heart conditions from foxglove, aspirin from willow bark, quinine for malaria from cinchona bark. Penicillin was discovered from a fungus that traditional cultures in multiple parts of the world had used for wound treatment for centuries before Alexander Fleming officially discovered it. The ancient world did not have chemistry, it had time, and it turned out that enough time and enough human attention to the natural world produced a pharmacological library that modern chemistry spent 3 centuries translating into scientific language. And here is the question that should be keeping researchers awake at night. We have lost most of it. The accumulated poison and antidote knowledge of tens of thousands of years of human experience was stored not in books but in people, in specific traditional cultures, in oral transmission systems, And the colonial disruption of traditional cultures across the last 5 centuries destroyed an enormous percentage of this pharmacological knowledge before it could be recorded. Species of plants known to be medicinally significant to indigenous cultures have gone extinct. Knowledge holders died without successors. Entire oral pharmacological traditions were disrupted and lost. We will never know what was in those traditions. We will never know which compounds those cultures had identified and how they used them. We will never recover that knowledge. What we have now are fragments, partial records, anthropological documentation of what existed before it was gone. And every year, more is lost as the last holders of traditional knowledge die without being asked what they know. There is an uncomfortable question sitting inside all of this, and I want to make sure you actually sit with it for a moment. The knowledge that built the foundation of modern medicine did not come from formal science. It came from the accumulated experience of human beings dying and surviving over tens of thousands of years, and other human beings paying extremely careful attention to what happened. It came from cultures that many formal academic traditions dismissed as primitive and superstitious. It came from the people who were closest to the natural world and who had the most time to watch it carefully. And the formal scientific tradition that eventually systematized and explained this knowledge frequently took the compounds, synthesized and patented them, and did not credit or compensate the cultures that identified them in the first place. That pattern has a name. It is called biopiracy, and it is still happening today. How did ancient humans first understand poison and antidotes? The honest answer is slowly, painfully, through death, through observation, through animal behavior, through systematic experimentation that was no less rigorous for lacking a laboratory, through specific gifted individuals who dedicated their lives to learning the boundary between what kills and what cures, through thousands of years of oral transmission that preserved what those individuals learned well enough to pass it forward to the next generation, who refined it further and passed it forward again. And ultimately, through a continuity of human attention to the natural world that produced knowledge so accurate that when formal science finally got around to analyzing it, it turned out to be correct. Not always, not entirely, but far more often than anyone had any right to expect from a process conducted without chemistry, without microscopes, without controlled trials, and without anything but human intelligence, human attention, and an enormous amount of human time. Before I go, I want to ask you something directly. Right now, in the comments below this video, there is a question I genuinely want your answer to. If you could recover one piece of lost ancient knowledge from any culture, any tradition, anywhere in the world, what would you choose and why? Not what you think the right answer is, what you actually find most fascinating. Tell me in the comments. I read them.